Howdy. I'm pleased to be here. I was actually one of the original board members of Eco America. I have enormous respect for Bob Berkowitz and Macon and the whole team there. I've been writing about the human connection to nature for about 16 years, and starting with Last Child in the Woods, which was about what I called nature deficit disorder. And one of the arguments I made in that is that to many kids and parents, kids happen to grow up, so it's adults as well. Nature has become an abstraction. It's become data and numbers. Earlier in the breakout session, I talked about last summer when, I think it was last summer, many of us saw Australia burning. And those remarkable images that many of us saw on television or on YouTube of people who had just lost their own house to flames, rushing into the fire, riding bicycles sometimes to take food and water to koalas and other animals. Those images were very moving, and people remember those. They don't remember a lot of the data about those fires or about the connection to climate change, but they remember those images. Recently, I've published a book called Our Wild Calling, which is why you're here. And it's about the human relationship with animals, other animals, both domestic, but in particular, I write about wild animals. I think that this is an underrated or often neglected area where we can talk to people about climate change, or to be more specific, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, which are climate change, biodiversity collapse, pandemics, and the issue of human loneliness and disconnect from nature and each other. Those four issues are all interrelated. You can't do much about any one of those unless you do something about the others. This connection that we have with animals is deeply emotional. We learned this in this last summer, over the last year. I wrote a piece for the Los Angeles Times back in July about the remarkable discovery that people had, many of them, when they looked out their windows in quarantine and realized that there were birds in their yard and there was nearby nature, and that nature is not just Yosemite. Nature is not just an abstraction. It's not just a bunch of statistics. And they became attached to those birds. They became attached to the coyote who walked through their backyard that they hadn't really looked at before. Where I live now, mountain lions walk through the backyard. We have a platonic relationship. We're a little distant, but I love the mountain lions too. But we recognize suddenly how much we needed nature. It's one of the remarkable things that's been reported a lot, that suddenly people had to have those parks. You know, you don't know what you got till it's gone. And we took comfort and solace from the birds outside our window, from the possum that shows up during quarantine. Now the question is, are we going to continue that and recognize that and build on that emotion that came with that? Or are we going to just go on with our business? I hope that part of the new normal is that we recognize, including and maybe especially in city neighborhoods, that there's other life out there. One of the issues that I deal with in Our Wild Calling is the issue of human loneliness. People have talked, medical folks have talked for quite a while about the epidemic of human loneliness, of human isolation. And they now relate human isolation and human loneliness to many of the same diseases that are caused by smoking and obesity. So it's gotten a lot of attention. There are a lot of things blamed for this, but we can't blame Steve Zuckerberg for everything. It's not just anti-social media. It's not only the fact that we have bad urban design and that if we go for a walk or run into a freeway, and certainly in San Diego, It is a lot of things. It's stranger danger. It's a lot of the things that have separated people from children from nature and made their parents feel so afraid about letting them go out into the woods or even into the backyard often. But I think all of that is rooted in an even deeper loneliness. I think our loneliness as individuals, much of it is rooted deeply into what I and others have called species loneliness. As a species, we are desperate to not feel alone in the universe. You know, why else would we look for Bigfoot? And I've interviewed Bigfoot hunters, and they're great folks. And but you know, sitting with them, I asked them, "Why do you look for Bigfoot?" And the best answer that I can get, and it's not the one they give, is this issue of species loneliness. Why else would we look for intelligent life on other planets when Stephen Hawking tells us it may not be a good idea to find that intelligent life on other planets? It's because we're desperate as a species to not feel alone in the universe. The truth is, we're not alone. We're surrounded, and this obviously has religious implications, but we're surrounded by an ongoing conversation that's going on right now outside my window. The more the science knows about how wild animals, domesticated animals, how trees communicate, the more we realize that we are not alone in this universe. And we can participate in that conversation if we pay attention, if we value it. Now, the biggest threat to that conversation of feeling connected to other species, other than development of land and disappearance of habitat due to our activities, is climate change. Biodiversity collapse is directly related to that. Pandemics are directly related to how we treat other animals, as we've learned. So much of what I've written about in this book is in the form of stories. It's very difficult to talk about this without telling stories. I think I still have time to tell a couple of the stories in the book. What I did is I collected well over 100 stories. They're not all in the book, but from people who talk about either their ongoing relationship with pet or more often their relationship, their encounters with wild animals. Even a few seconds for some of these people have changed their lives, have touched them deeply emotionally. And the idea of not having those animals, that connection, is intolerable to many people. One of the stories I tell is about Paul Dayton, who's an oceanographer at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, or he tells it in the book. He talks about how he was on the bottom of the ocean once as a student at the University of Washington in oceanography, and he was looking for samples. And he had his face to the sand and he's going through it. And he felt above him come something very, very large. And then it stopped. It's usually not a good sign. And he looked up and he saw a big tentacle coming down. Then he looked over here, another big tentacle coming down. And as he puts it, it was one of those giant octopuses of the Pacific Ocean, about 12-foot wingspan, and it thought I was a clam, and it came down and got me. It wrapped him up in its arms. People think those arms, tentacles, are soft or anything but. He couldn't move. Around then, he realized he was running out of oxygen. And so with his last strength, he pushed off the bottom, and he and the octopus wrapped around him, went up and up in the column of water. And as they did, he could feel the razor sharp beak of the octopus coming around his neck until he was looking into the octopus's eye. And he said, I think that the octopus and I made a non-aggression pact at the risk of anthropomorphizing. Right then they hit the water, and he's looking down into the water, and he is still making eye contact with the octopus, who's still there. So the octopus starts sinking into the darkness. And what does Paul do? He puts his mask back on and dives down and chases the octopus. I said, Paul, why would you do that? He says he didn't know. He's a hardcore scientist. He used the word spiritual. He's a little embarrassed, but he did know that he did not want those moments to end. Now, story after story that I collected have that element in them, even when people were in danger. In the book, I searched for what that is. What is it that he felt? What is it that so many people have felt between them and another animal? I call that in the book the habitat of the heart. And I think we have two habitats. One is the physical habitat that we spend so much time, as we should, trying to protect and tell our kids about. The other habitat is the habitat of the heart. And we spend very little time talking about and protecting and telling our kids about that. And I think that has much to do with the discussion about climate change, about biodiversity collapse. It has, I think, a lot to do with the future of environmentalism. Thank you.